What do you say? One last ride? Okay, maybe not that cliche and whimsical. Just play the intro.
The filming Daniel.
Hey guys, it's Daniel here, back with a new movie review, and today, I'm here today on my 199th video, close to 200 video, to review James Gunn's last film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, after he became, I guess, one of the presidents of DC, so he's working on his own DC Extended Universe, which is different from the actual DC Extended Universe, so I guess he's kind of retired from the MCU, so I'm here today to review his last film in the MCU, as well as the third and potentially last film in this trilogy in the MCU, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 takes place after the events of Avengers Endgame, Thor Love and Thunder, and the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, all those combined, and it follows our typical Guardians once again, even though they're not typical because they're fantastic. Star-Lord, Peter Quill, Drax the Destroyer, Mantis, the chick with the antenna, as Rocket calls them, Nebula, Rocket Raccoon, and Groot, as they take upon help on nowhere. But then, the Guardians end up in a rope of adventures that could end up leading to the end of the Guardians story as we know it, as they face against the High Evolutionary, face against the Golden People from the last Guardians of the Galaxy movie as they sent Adam Warlock into the mix, as well as being connected by the High Evolutionary's connection to Rocket Raccoon, as we discover his traumatic backstory. So, like I said at the beginning of this video, this is the last movie in the MCU to be done by James Gunn, as he's, again, going to be one of the heads at DC, so he's making his own DC Cinematic Universe, because I guess the DC Extended Universe is kind of running its course this year. I don't know, it's hard to tell, I haven't been there in a while. So, this is his last film, and it's the third Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and I guess before I talk about what I think about this film, I should try to discuss what I think of the first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies, like the two feature films. I love them. I thought they were fantastic. The first Guardians of the Galaxy film really raised the bar for MCU because it was a different type of MCU movie that we were not expecting. We did not expect this gang of nobodies to be able to achieve as being some of the most iconic MCU characters, but the first Guardians of the Galaxy did that, so love the first one. Second one, I also think is just as good as the first film. I used to love it more, but I think it's just as good, but it definitely raised the bar from the first movie, had really cool, better villains, some of the most emotional scenes and hilarious scenes really mixed well, so love the first two films. And I also really had a blast watching the holiday special. I thought that was very funny. So here we are with the third and potentially last Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and I've seen it twice now, once at the cinemas and then once again. So after watching it twice now and gathering all my thoughts, what do I think of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? I liked it. I just wanted to let you know, I really liked a lot of things in this movie. But as a part of being a reviewer, I have to come off as honest about my opinions, because watching it for a second time to try and gather all my thoughts made me realize that while I really liked it, I think it's probably my least favourite of the Guardians of the Galaxy series. Oh, come at me! Now again, I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I'm just torn by how I feel about this, and keep in mind, this might possibly be the hardest review I'll be doing this year. I've been thinking about my thoughts about this film because I've just been so conflicted about my opinions on this film. But the experience that it did give me was joy. You know, pretty good joy from time to time. So I do think it is a pretty good Marvel Cinematic Universe film. But it does come with a lot of issues. But before we talk about the issues, let's talk about the good. First of all, the acting in the movie is still fantastic from a lot of the characters. I still really love a lot of these characters. I think that they still held the comedic side, but also can tone down when they have to go into dramatic mode. So we still have the return of Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, played once again by Chris Pratt, and I still think he's hilarious as the character. I still love Chris Pratt's acting. It's not as good as I thought he was in the first two films, or even the Avengers movies, but I still thought he was great as the character, because he's definitely coping over the death of his true love, that being Gamora, and him trying to cope with that loss, but also trying to lead the team as best as he can through this mission to save one of their members' lives. And you can tell that while he has a bit of weaknesses now and again, he's still trying his best to be a good leader, because, again, the grief that he's trying to get through is dealing with Gamora. And Gamora in this movie, played once again by Zoe Saldana, is not the same because, as shown at the end of Avengers Endgame, a version of Gamora from 2014 came into the present, so now she's around here, so she doesn't know anything about Peter Quill and her relationship, so he's just trying to gather that information for her. And I will say that from time to time, their relationship can come off as pretty humorous, because honestly, it is pretty funny that someone would have to remind a love interest who doesn't even remember them, so it's just trying to jog the memories, but it doesn't work out that well, but I think I'll have to get more into that later. Dave Bautista is still hilarious as Drax. Pom Kenfliv, I can't remember her name. I'll put her name right here. She's still adorable as ever as Mantis, because she's really trying to get into more of the caring side for her character, but also trying to look out for every member of her team out as best as she can, because, I mean, look at her. She's such a sweetheart. Karen Gillian, great as Nebula. I love what they did with Nebula in this movie, because she really feels more as the leadership type, even more than Peter Quill, because she makes a lot of demands, she gives some orders to the team, she still cares about the team, and she's willing to put her life before any of the other members. It's a really good character evolution from when we saw in the first Guardians film, because in the first Guardians she was a villain, but then in the second movie she kind of toned down and became more of an anti-hero, and now she's one of the main characters, and I love the evolution of her character, so I applaud Karen Gillian's performance. Vin Diesel as Groot, I thought he was good. He still captured the tone of his character, and I gotta say, he does have a really dramatic moment near the end of the movie, which I found very good. But honestly, those Guardians are really just there for no example, because the one that I'm really trying to get to is, in my opinion, the real reason why I feel like it definitely upped the movie a bit and made it feel different from the other two, and that has to be what they did with the character of Rocket, played once again by Bradley Cooper. Wow. I loved what they did with Rocket in this movie, because as you saw in the trailers, he's like the main centerpiece of the movie that adds to the dramatic tone that the movie goes into, because as you saw in the trailers, there's a bit of revealing about his past and his backstory, and without spoiling anything, the flashbacks to his backstory I thought was some of the most powerful moments I've ever seen in a Marvel movie. That was so great. Again, just like Nebula, it showed the high evolution that his character went through, because he was just more of a comedic side and really only cared about making quips in terms, but there's more to him. There's more underneath that raccoon skin. His backstory really makes him damaged inside, and I gotta say, the resolution they gave his character was perfect. I mean, the way that they show his character at the end was just great. And I have to say, this is definitely the best performance that Bradley Cooper gives as the character, and it just made me feel so bad for him. And honestly, I think he felt like probably the main character of this movie. Yes, he felt like a bit of a main character, and usually the problem with turning a supporting character into a main character in a film that centers on all the characters is that character usually works in small doses, but in this case, I think he worked as the main character, and again, it just adds to the performance and the subtext and his character arc about identity that just makes him so sympathetic as a character and turns him into one of the best characters in the MCU. So, well done, writers and James Gunn, for giving Rocket this character arc. The visual aesthetic of the film is definitely, again, a high evolution of what the films have been over the past few years, because they definitely elevated it, and Rocket's CGI was great, Groot's design was fantastic, the different worlds they visit is very creative and weird as usual, as a Guardians of the Galaxy movie should be, and going hand in hand with the visuals is the action sequences. I thought that the action was very brutal, very visually pleasing, and not only that, but some of these action scenes in the film are actually filled with emotion. During this big action scene, there are some characters that aren't fighting, and they're just having a moment where they kind of gathering their emotional turmoil that they're facing in the movie, especially one near in the end, which I won't spoil, but that was just one of the most perfect scenes I've ever seen in the Marvel movie. I thought that was fantastic. And speaking of that, wow. This has to be one of the darkest MCU movies I've ever seen in a long time. I mean, not everything was dark, but the stuff that is dark in the movie, it goes really dark. I mean, wow. I mean, these scenes are so, deep. They're frightening. They make you angry. They make you sad. Especially, again, around the whole Rocket standpoint, because he goes through all the emotions the most. And it's also about every character trying to find out exactly who they are and how they fit into this world. Are they meant to be a Guardian? Are they meant to be their own character? We don't know. It's just them just gathering the thoughts, and it adds to the dramatic subplots because they go to some real dark places in the story. But that's not to say that the movie is without its humour, though, because it's a Guardians of the Galaxy movie. There's supposed to be humour in the movie, so there definitely is. And I have to say, for the most part, there were some moments that made me laugh hysterically, especially Drax, Mantis, and Nebula. Those were great. And, some of the moments with Gamora was great as well. And Rocket still has his quips now and again, but honestly, I feel like that they definitely leaned more into the dramatic side for this movie, because the first film is just pure comedy. With a few little emotional moments now and again, it was just mainly pure comedy. The second movie actually balanced it out a bit. This one, I feel like it's starting to lean more into the more of the drama than the comedy. And for the most part, it works because the drama was fantastic. But as for the treatment with the comedy, I'll get to that later. But one thing I really loved about the drama subtext, and as well as the dramatic story that it tells, is that some of the things that were hinted at in the first few movies that I feel like they really treated as a bit of a joke in the first two movies. It was just a quick little joke, like, haha, that was funny. They give some dramatic meaning to those jokes in this film. There's reasons why they existed in the first place, and now when you go back and watch the movies again, you don't see them as jokes. You see them as foreshadowing for the trauma that all the characters face in this movie. And that's what really makes the movie a bit more special in terms of the story. Because yeah, not everything works, but the stuff that does work, it really works. And I gotta say, I think the movie wraps up pretty nicely. I mean, I will say after the climax. After the climax, the ending, I thought was a pretty good conclusion to the trilogy. I mean, granted, it wasn't perfect, but the stuff in the ending that was resoluted, I think resoluted very well and really felt like a change from the characters' story arcs when they were first introduced in the MCU, and it definitely wraps up pretty nicely. So, well done, James Gunn. I thought that was pretty good. Thank you. So yeah, those good things about the movie, I did say, were very, very good. But now, guys, unfortunately, we reached the point of the review where I do need to be a bit more critical towards Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And the problems that I have, while this movie is good, I'm not gonna lie, guys, there is a lot to nitpick and say what's wrong about this movie. And before I get into those problems, I have one thing to say as to why I'm being a bit more critical towards these problems with the movie. And that's because I love the Guardians of the Galaxy. I love the characters, I love the films, I love the stories that they tell, I love the Guardians of the Galaxy. Now granted, I haven't seen that little mini short series, I Am Groot, I haven't seen that, but the other thing else, I love the first film, the second film, and the holiday special. I think that I've been a huge lover of Guardians of the Galaxy ever since I saw the first one back in 2016, 2 years after it was released in 2014. And after the Avengers and Captain America, I think Guardians of the Galaxy might be the third best series of films that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has had. It had a lot of stuff to love. So all the negative things that I say about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 don't come from hate. They come from a place of love. This is some love coming from a devoted lover of Guardians of the Galaxy who just felt like this movie could have been so much better and a better movie to wrap up the series. I mean, the ending was good, but it felt like that was an ending for what could have been a completely different film because this movie could have been so much better. It was enjoyable, but it does have things to say that are wrong with this movie. First of all is the pacing. This can be a bit of a choppy and a bit of a messy film from now and again, because it comes from one point, it's supposed to be like this long scene where the characters are kind of gathering up their emotions, like at the beginning of the movie, but it doesn't go on for like 5 or 10 minutes, because 5 or 7 minutes later, they cut to Adam Warlock coming into this picture, and now we're dealing with the main story. So we're going to that place, and then we're going to this one area, and then the flashbacks of Rocket's past start coming in, which I will say the flashbacks were amazing, but I will admit that the way that they transition into the film was a bit hit or miss, because it felt like they were like, well, we haven't had a flashback in a while, and even though the scene has nothing to do with the flashback, let's just pop it in anyway. So they just quickly edited that flashback in and say, okay, let's get out of here. And then boom. And then having characters in this different location, having not really doing anything about the whole Rocket situation that happens there. I will admit that they could have transitioned into the flashback more smoothly, because the flashbacks were just amazing. So I'm not saying anything negative about the flashbacks, it's just the transition into those flashbacks. But I think the problem I have with the pacing the most is the fact that while I did say that some characters had their time to shine in the Guardians group, I felt like the interactions could have had a lot more potential, especially with Peter and Mantis. They do share 1 or 2 like really emotional scenes with each other, like probably a few things, but not really something totally dramatic, like meaningful, because spoilers for the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 deleted scene and the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, but it's revealed in those moments that they're actually siblings, because Ego raised Mantis, took her from her home planet and raised him on as his own, and he's Star-Lord's father, so that technically makes them adoptive siblings. So I wanted there to be more interactions between them, realizing that they're siblings and finding more they can do with each other now that they're siblings. In fact, maybe even have a story where Peter's being overprotective and doesn't want Mantis to go because he lost Gamora and doesn't want to lose Mantis, but they're learning to trust each other. That could have been a great story, but there isn't a lot to do with those characters, so I felt like they could have been a little bit better with their relationship, that is. And again, this movie had some more potential that I really wanted for a conclusion, and they're just not taking that big of advantage of. And another problem I had with the relationships is that they really seem to be going over the top with a lot of screaming and shouting, because yeah, screaming and shouting. I forgot to mention screaming and shouting. There was a lot of shouting between the team members throughout the movie, and sometimes not really for real reason. It was just an opportunity for the actors to go, I'm so angry, And while it can be funny from time to time, it also kind of made the characters come off a bit grating from time to time too, and I felt like they were trying a bit too hard with it. And sometimes it didn't really feel like they would come off as a bit that chemistry that they used to have. Another problem I had with the film deals with some of the new characters in the film. Some of them kind of came off as a bit unnecessary, and they could have come off with a plot to come off of without having these characters. Or some of the characters kind of came off as over the top and a bit goofy. The ones I felt like they could have done without, in some cases, was first off, Adam Warlock. I felt as though that while he was pretty good from time to time, he had some hilarious moments, he had some intimidating moments, he had some pretty adorable moments, and Will Poulter did a fantastic job playing the character. I have to ask myself at the end of the film, was this character absolutely necessary for the film? And honestly, in some cases, or maybe even half the cases, or even most of the cases, I don't know, in some case or another, Not really. If you took that character out of the film and focused more on the High Evolutionary being an antagonist, then the film wouldn't have a bit of a juggle pacing issue as I thought it was, because Adam Warlock adds a new side story to the plot, and just a new character that, honestly, I didn't really think needed to be there, as the focus really should have been more on the Guardians of the Galaxy facing the High Evolutionary and gathering their emotions over the past few films. Adam, I felt like, was kind of just adding a new wrench into that story and just making just a few little mishaps and a misunderstood kind of character. Now again, this character is not weak or terrible. I think he's, in many points, pretty good and probably even very good as a character. As a villain though, I felt like he didn't really need to be in the movie that much. And the other character I felt like that didn't really need to be in a lot of the movie, and you're probably gonna disagree with me a lot for saying this, is actually this film's timeline version of Gamora. Now, Zoe Saldana still adds to the character of what would be like if you saw Gamora before she met the Guardians. But A, while she is funny from time to time, her constant shouting and rageful reactions kind of made her come off as obnoxious. And B, she doesn't really do anything too monumental or that big for the group in this movie, besides a few little moments now and again where she protects Rocket, but other than that, honestly, there was a scene with Adam Warlock at the end of the movie where he does something, and I felt like that was something that this film's version of Gamora could have done because it would have given her a bit more of a purpose, but honestly, I felt like if you replace the relationship between Peter and Gamora with the relationship between Peter and Mantis, and Peter having an overprotectiveness problem of Mantis and learning to trust each other, that would have been a great way for Peter to kind of deal with all the trauma that he faced in the past few films. But I felt like adding Gamora into the mix, this film's version of Gamora, could have actually worked. I did like the resolution to their story at the end of the film, but with some of the treatment that they went with her throughout the rest of the movie, I felt like they probably could have done with or without her. And remember when I said that there was a character that I said was being a bit too over the top and goofy? Well, I just want to let you know, I do like this character for half the movie, but the other half, yeah. And that's the main villain of the movie, the High Evolutionary. Now don't get me wrong, I think he's a pretty good villain from time to time. He can come off as pretty menacing, manipulative, and I will admit, yeah, he is one of the most hateable characters in the MCU, because you just hate what he does in the movie, and in the backstories we find out, you just want to beat him up even more, and when you're seeing this character being defeated, you just say, oh yeah, go ahead, do it. But my problem isn't really with the character's writing, it's with the performance that was given. While the actor was pretty good from time to time, there are moments where I do agree with some people who say that he shouts and screams out of nowhere many times. Even when some things are going his way, he still likes to scream out many times of his constant shouting. It's like the actor is just thinking, oh, if I be more loud and angry, they'll think I'm menacing. But it didn't come off as that scary for me, and didn't even come off as scary at all, because it was just too silly. Honestly, I felt like they could have went more with him being a more reserved and quiet villain. Then he could have come off as pretty scary. But as a whole, I think he's a pretty good villain, but I felt like Ego was a bit of a better villain than him. Another thing in the movie that can come off as a bit repetitive sometimes is that I felt like there were quite a few fake-outs in the film. 4 or 5 fake-outs in the film, where a character seems like they're gonna be not okay, but they're okay. Now, there's only one fake-out near the, end of the second act that I thought was fantastic because I wanted that character to be okay, but then you think this character's gonna be not okay, but they are okay. Then you think this character's gonna be not okay, but they are okay. And then at the end, you think this character's not okay, but Deus Ex Machina, this one character who I felt like didn't even need to be in the movie in the first place, comes and helps that character out, and now they're okay. Don't worry, I'm not going to give any spoilers away, I'm not going to say who those characters are, but I felt like that maybe 1 or 2 of the fake-outs would have been surmised, because 4 or 5 fake-outs I felt like did kind of get a bit repetitive sometimes. And the last problem that I had with this movie was its climax. Now, I thought the climax was cool from time to time, but I felt like that a lot of the climax kind of just felt like the first film again. The same climax, except I felt like that it worked more in that film than it does in this one, because this one is just going onto a big giant ship and just shooting out people around the outside. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, that's what the Guardians of the Galaxy have always done. They've always done more shooting instead of like fist-to-fist combat. Well, not really in the second film. You felt like they really... That's the reason why I felt like this climax could have been a lot better, is because I felt like they really elevated the climax in the second movie. All of the powers and dealing with ego and all that, I felt like they really raised the bar in the second movie over the first film. This one, I just felt like it didn't really raise the bar over the second one or the first one, because it felt like it just gone back to what it was like in the first film. And I felt like it worked for the first film, but it doesn't work for the third and potentially final film. I felt like the climax needed to be a bit leveled up, especially since this is like the climax of the Guardians story in the MCU, so I wanted there to be a bit more epicness to it. And here's the one thing I will say about the climax. There is a final scene in this climax dealing with one of the characters discovering part of themselves. I'm not going to spoil it, but let me just say that it's beautifully handled, intelligently put together, nothing is said, it's just the character realizing something they never thought they would. This scene just comes off as really emotional and just gives a whole new meaning about what the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done. Comes off as one of the most emotional, but also one of the darkest scenes to come from the MCU. As well as a scene in the middle of the film that's just as emotionally sad. However, the climax still just felt like a bit of a replica of the first film. I mean, there was a really cool action shot where it seemed like it was filmed in one take. You might have seen it in the trailers, but that scene was just so epic. But I felt like that the way the villain gets defeated, I felt like could have been a little bit stronger and a bit more like fight to fight. It just happens like that. So overall, this was a really, really difficult film for me to review. In fact, again, I've been cobbling my thoughts many times because I know this video is going to be very long. When I edit it, I'm going to realise, oh god, this is going to be a really long video. But I felt like the longer the video, the more I can really give my thoughts out to you guys. Because I do like this movie. I really like it. The funny thing about the movie is that it really should have been my favourite. It goes a lot of places I wanted the Guardians of the Galaxy movies to go. But why don't I find it that? Because a lot of people really regard it as a masterpiece on Rotten Tomatoes and around the world. And here's the thing, if you do love this movie more than I do, that's perfectly fine. You can't help what you love. Hell, I loved the second one as much as the first film. Even when I first saw it, I found it was better than the first film, but I still thought it's as good as the first film, even though people say it's not as good as the first film. When in my opinion, they really made much more better scenes in the second film that make it just as good as the first film. And yet they kind of dialed back a little bit with this one. Despite, again, what they did with Rocket. They really definitely took risks with Rocket, and I thought they handled it very well. The other Guardians, though, I felt like they could have been a bit stronger as a community together. But even with that, I still think the ending was pretty satisfying. It still has my favourite characters, and plus, even though it's not as, like, big or emotionally satisfying as I could have expected, I'm just glad that we had the Guardians to begin with. Because really, they really raise the bar, and they come off as great characters in the MCU, and it really shows what you can do in a Marvel film if you combine humour with dramatic subjects from these characters, these comedic characters, going through different dramatic situations. The music... Also, can I just say, the music was... it was okay, like, the score was fantastic. The soundtrack, though, that was one of the things I loved about the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, is that they had iconic songs in the soundtrack. You know, Mr. Blue Sky, Come and Get Your Love, Escape, Brandy, or Fine Girl. I remember so many songs from the first two films, and yet remember a little few of them from this one. I mean, they're not bad, they just didn't come off as that memorable. But going back, even though this film wasn't as good as I thought it was, I'm still glad we have the Guardians to begin with. Plus, it's not particularly over, and I won't say why because of the ending, but the ending is still pretty good. So, overall, I will give this movie a 3.5 out of 5. It's a really enjoyable film. I mean, I don't think it's as good as people say it is, plus I do think it is the weakest, but I wouldn't dare say don't go see it. I mean, it's the conclusion to the Guardian story, and like I said, the stuff that they did with Rocket was absolute perfection. I never thought they really do much with this character, but what they do meant so much to me. So, yeah, could have been better, yes, but the stuff that is good, and just the reminder of how we got these Guardians to begin with, does make it more than worth it. But anyway, big question, what did you think of this? I feel like I'm going to be one of the biggest Lone Rangers on this one, because I have seen people who have said that it's not as good as everyone else says it is. In fact, some of them said they didn't even like it, but I feel like I'm going to be like one of the 5 people on the planet who didn't find this movie a masterpiece. Plus, it's not the best thing since Endgame. I still feel like No Way Home really tops that list. But what do you think? Do you love it? Do you hate it? And who is your favourite Guardians member? And what is your favourite film that comes off as a adios to a franchise? Let me know in the comment section below. And going to get some more videos done. I still enjoyed the movie. I could see it again one day, but I just didn't think it was as good as I thought it was. It's definitely not as good as the first 2. But I'm glad we had these characters. And I give so much luck to James Gunn where he goes in his career. While I am sad that he's gone, I'm happy for the time that he gave us. So, with big appreciations, James Gunn, if you ever see this video, which I'm pretty sure you're not, I want to thank you for what you've done for the MCU. And I cannot wait to see what approach you take with DC. I'm Daniel, reviewing movies, TV shows, doing videos. Still listening to some upbeat music. In fact, I'll just take that little upbeat music I played at the beginning and just play it myself. Why the hell not? I'm Daniel Vickers. Peace out, man. It's cheesy, but what the hell, I can do it.